Good afternoon, everyone. So I signed Jason and I up for this session because I wanted to share a recent experience that we had with traveling a ROM blockbuster called Ultimate Dinos, Giants from Gondwana. Did anyone see that show at the ROM? So a small portion of you. We both tag team this project as a project manager. So Jason was actually responsible for project managing the creative development, production, installation at the ROM. And I was tasked with the responsibility of making the show travel ready for an international tour, which included two US venues. It was not an easy task to make it travel ready. This is actually a 14,000 square foot show. So there was a lot of work and complexity involved with it. Today we're just going to introduce you to the show, the things that we considered during the design and production phases, and talk about coding, packing, shipping the show, and the experience that we had actually traveling with the show as tour managers. I think we've heard a lot of the perspectives of the lender and the borrower, which we'll speak to a little bit, but I think it's also important to understand life on the road as the tour manager and some of the challenges that you have with your clients.
Good afternoon, everybody. So Amleet and I are going to split up this presentation. I'll talk a little bit about what went into the design and production of the show itself, things that I thought about when developing the show with the intent to travel. So first of all, I thought I'd just introduce or talk a little bit about the Royal Ontario Museum's traveling exhibition program. So we don't really have one. What we've had a history of doing over the last 5 years is we've moved away somewhat from borrowing major exhibitions. We used to take a lot of shows from places like American Museum of Natural History, and we put them on the floor at the ROM. What we've started to do in the last 5 years is to develop our own exhibition. So we would either use our own collection or we would borrow material from other museums and develop our own curatorial content or intellectual property, put it on the floor at the ROM, and then we'd look to secure one additional venue to offset the cost of developing a show from scratch. So we've partnered with some of the museums in this room, as well as places like Vancouver Art Gallery, Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, etc. So typically I manage exhibitions that are coming into the museum. So when I got assigned Ultimate Dinosaurs, one of the sort of mandates was that they were looking to tour this more than one venue. They were looking at doing an international or North American tour. So there was we had a few unique challenges to tackle. First of all, the ROM's temporary exhibition space, I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but it's 18,000 square feet. So raise your hand if you have an 18,000 square foot gallery in your institution. Right. Do you know who has an 18,000 square foot gallery? Nobody, right? So we, we knew it wasn't going to fit in most venues. Now we typically carve out about 1,000 or 2,000 square feet for a retail shop, as well as about 1,000 square feet for a queuing area at the beginning of the exhibition. But that still left us with a 14,000 square foot exhibition that we needed to put on the road. So going into this, key things that I started to think about were adaptability and making sure that the components were modular, which are probably key when you're thinking about any traveling exhibition. I also started to think about things, what would I expect from another museum when it was coming into the ROM? What level of, what did I expect in the installation manual? How did I want this material organized? How did I want it created? So things like that. And then starting to think about what are the needs going outside of Canada, looking at American venues, looking at things like graphics, language, etc. And how do I make sure that our exhibition is adaptable to their needs? So just really quickly, I'll touch on a couple of the highlights of the exhibition. So the exhibition featured 17 casts of South American, dinosaurs from the southern continent. So when you think about dinosaurs, or most dinosaur shows that you've seen in dinosaur galleries within Canada and North America, it's primarily dinosaurs from the northern hemisphere, so things like T-Rex, Triceratops, etc. This is a show entirely based on dinosaurs from the southern continents. So most of these dinosaurs, most people have never seen before or are unfamiliar with. So the first year of production was essentially, we partnered with a company called Research Casting out of Trenton, and they worked with our curator to travel throughout South America, Argentina, and scan these dinosaur fossils and create 17 full dinosaur casts. We also included about 40 fossils from our own collection in the exhibition. And then we thought about how do we, beyond that, how do we make this exhibition appealing to other venues? What's going to set it apart? There was a lot of dinosaur exhibitions on the road in the last couple of years, so we wanted to stand out. So we really pushed the kind of boundaries as far as what the ROM's ever done with multimedia. We introduced things that we'd never done before. For example, I don't know if you can see it there with the T-Rex on the left-hand side at the bottom. We introduced augmented reality stations. So you would point an iPad at these dinosaurs and it would essentially flush the dinosaur out in real time in front of you. Clicker. We also introduced, what you can see in the bottom left there are reactive walls. So relying on Kinect's technology, they essentially had skeletal tracking, and as you approach these video walls, the environments would react to your movement or your location. And finally, we introduced a 5-player communal interactive video game. So the users would stand at each of those podiums there, and they'd all work together to piece together Gondwana. So a lot of this we'd never done before. We had to think about things when you're introducing this type of multimedia. You have to think about longevity. So think about the hardware that you're installing in an exhibition. Computers change on a regular basis. So how do you address that? How do you address multiple languages built into this multimedia? So what we did was we really worked with our developers to integrate a flexible content management system in all the applications that we built. So, for example, for Canadian venues, we had an English-French toggle, which could be turned off within the app settings for American venues. We are able to update content quite easily. You're able to swap out the language. So if you wanted to swap the French out for Spanish for an American venue, you're able to do that within the app. And then we started thinking about packaging the show. So let's see if we can get a couple examples. So this is obviously an enormous show to put on the road. So we started to think about how do we make sure that all the exhibitry is as standardized as possible, so that you don't end up with 10,000 parts when it gets to the next venue. So each of the platforms that the dinosaurs are mounted on, you can see in the bottom right, they're assembled with a sort of very generic post and beam system. We had 7 platforms in total. Each of the platforms could be knocked down pretty much completely flat, but all the parts that went into supporting those platforms were standard. So they could be interchanged between platforms, and if you ever lost some during transit or whatever, it was quite easy to swap those out. As well as the graphics. All the graphic carriers within the show, we had 3 different types. You can see in the top left picture there in the bottom corner. We had iPads integrated into a lot of our graphic panels, and what we did was they're all standardized sizes, and the graphic itself could actually was held in with cleats, and you could essentially slide it out and swap it in with a new graphic. So if you wanted to switch out the English and French, you weren't replacing the entire carrier. So we weren't doing any direct print onto graphic substrates, things like that. What else do we do? And then thinking about modularity and how to adapt the show for other venues that are obviously not going to have a 14,000 square foot exhibition hall. So what I did was I worked closely with our curator. Now I should say the themes of the show are continental drift and evolution. So very linear stories. It's very hard to kind of pull a section of that story out and have the narrative still make sense. But what we did do was so you've got the Triassic section in the beginning, then you move into Jurassic and then Cretaceous. But what we did do is each of the platforms are shaped to mimic roughly at one of the southern continents. So section 3 there, where you see platform C, D, and E, are Africa, Madagascar, and South America. What we realized was that if you pulled the entire Madagascar platform out of the exhibition itself, the storyline still made sense. So we really went through the exhibition and looked at what could we pull where we maintain the integrity of the narrative of the show, so that the different venues had some flexibility as well. You can essentially rotate any of those platforms any way you need to and still have the same experience. So we approached it thinking, well, I could pull Madagascar. We did send the exhibition down to the Science Museum of Minnesota. They had obviously a space constraint. I said, well, just pull Madagascar. Well, the dinosaur that's on Madagascar is Ratha navis, and go figure, their paleontologist was the one that discovered it. So that didn't fly, right? So, plan B. So what we ended up doing was pulling, in section 2 there, the smaller platform is actually representing sort of when the continents, Pangea essentially split to Laurasia and Gondwana, and we ended up pulling platform B and putting it up in their lobby as a kind of promo for the exhibition, and the show still made sense. So wherever possible, try to be as flexible as possible. And there you can see this is just an example of the cross framing for each of these platforms, and you can see that all of the cross beams are comparable lengths and all comparable parts, so they're interchangeable. One of the other things that we introduced in this exhibition is we wanted to make sure that it was family friendly. So we introduced a family trail, and one of the activities within the family trail is there's a whole series of interactives, but we introduced like a takeaway family guide for kids. And as they made their way through the exhibition, we tried to introduce sort of low-tech, old-school type of installations where the kids would go around and they'd take a page of their family guide or activity trail, and they'd take a rubbing of a dinosaur at each station. And at the end, if they collected all 8, they got to rub a seal that said they were a certified ROM junior paleontologist. So the other thing I would sort of advise when you're thinking about traveling shows to other venues, don't underestimate the abuse that visitors will have on your show. So first we put out these little carbon rubbing handles, and kids would go around and they ended up carbon rubbing half of our graphics. So we had to replace a ton of those initially. So I thought, okay, fine. I'll aircraft cable them to the metal base of the platform. There's no way that they can move them. And I put those little acrylic discs in so the aircraft cable wouldn't reach past that acrylic disc. So fine, the disc gets dirty, that's fine. Within a week, kids had broken 3 pieces of like 100 gauge aircraft cable. It's just snapped it. I still have no idea. So Cincinnati, which was our second venue, showed up and said, yeah, that's not gonna fly. So what we did was we ended up replacing all of those with embossing machines for the road. And I guess one other example of sort of underestimating the damage was you can see the augmented reality viewers under T-Rex there. They basically were viewers that slid up and down and left to right to view the iPads. Well, they were made out of like 1/4 inch thick aluminum, like forged aluminum steel, right? So I think absolutely, like they're built like a tank. I replaced them like about 4 times through the run of our installation. Ended up beefing them up, doubling the thickness of the steel. They went to Cincinnati and they were broken within 2 months, right? So we finally found a way to solve that, where we just kept bulking them up, and they're robust now, but yeah, a little bit shocking. So I was going to turn it over to Amleet to talk about packaging the show for travel.
So I feel like I got the worst end of the project. I had to code the show and pack it. One of the most challenging parts, I think, of this project was developing a coding system that didn't just make sense to us internally at the ROM, because there were so many pieces, but also would work for our clients, because they were ultimately the ones that were responsible for packing it, installing it, and sending it to the next venue, and they didn't obviously know it as intimately as we did. So it was really important to build a system that was clear, concise, and easy to pick up at the most basic level. It took me a few weeks to devise a system I think that made sense to me. I really struggled on how to associate the coding to the show. I should reiterate, this is not like a turnkey exhibition, which we talked about a bit yesterday. It's more of one of those Lego block ones. So the coding really helped our clients put the puzzles together and the pieces of it. So I thought about whether I should associate the coding to the thematic layout of the show, or if it was more construction parts focused, where I like things that are coded together and packed together and so on. And I ended up doing a combination of the two, and the basis of the coding really boils down to 4 simple colors: blue, green, purple, and orange. These colors represented the 4 sections or time periods that Jason mentioned that are presented in the show, and each section has its own unique list of AV and lighting equipment, exhibitry, casts, and specimens associated with that color, or curatorial section. All the exhibit components listed on the right on this slide, like monoliths and education pods, wall cases and text carriers, were each marked with a sticker that had one of those 4 colors, and written on the sticker was a very specific code that helped identify the exact location of where the text panel sat in the show or on the platform. The codes I wrote are actually, I think, now that I think about it, devised from my archaeological training. It's kind of similar to what you do in the field, and you have to register like the really good finds from the day. So the 2, you see an example here, 2BCM6. The 2 represented the section, so this section 2 in the show. B represented the platform. There were 7 platforms, and each had a letter associated with it, which actually came from our construction drawing, so it was consistent with that. The next acronym represented the type of object. So in this case, CM, it's a council-mounted object, so it's a text panel or something like that that sits on the platform. And 6 is the order which it appears on the platform. So this is the 6th piece, probably out of 12 that wrap around the platform. So you're literally just looking at the number and looking at your larger exhibit layout and placing them in the right order. So this was sort of my process, which I sort of made up. For packing the dinos. After building a full inventory list, in hindsight, I would recommend doing that as you build your first installation at your home base, but I actually was assigned after it was already installed at the ROM, so I had to go back, learn the show based on the construction drawings, and start building that inventory list, and writing out all the coding based on the system that I devised. And the next step was really just to take apart the show at the ROM for packing and coding. We had about 3.5 weeks to do it before we had to bring our next blockbuster in. The first thing I did before the show even closed at the ROM was to prepare all the coding stickers in advance, and I also recruited and trained about 5 external museum studies students to assist with attaching the codes and helping me write all the crate lists. This is not something I could do on my own, and I knew that because it was 14,000 square feet. So I worked more closely with the contractor, and I had a group of students helping me with coding and making those crate lists. When we were ready to take apart the ROM show, we didn't just take things apart and start throwing them into crates. It was a much more organized process due to the size and the complexity of the show. So you really had to dismantle, organize, and inventory the pieces before you started to create them and build your lists. I had to literally physically code the show with my students. So you see me there literally attaching stickers to all those plywood pieces. I actually hit my head on that dinosaur too. I survived, he lost a vertebra. So you could just glue it back together as a cast. So after coding and attaching those stickers, we started to soft pack some of the items just so there wasn't scratching and things like that, just vibrations from traveling, before hard crating them. And I think if our intention was to travel the show for 5 to 7 years, I would have invested in sort of thin moving blankets, but at the time we only had 2 venues booked, so we actually invested in just doing bubble wrap and foam core and honeycomb filler material, which is really great to use as spacer in your crates. And the final step for closing and sealing the crate was to double check the drafted crate lists, just really to ensure accuracy. So as the contractors, their crew started to pack the crates. The students and myself were writing down all the codes of everything that was going into each individual crate. And then I personally did a check of each crate, double check the codes, the contents, and ensure that the right things were going into the right crate. Because when you have so many people working on such a large exhibition, it's very tempting to some people just to throw something random into the crate just to fill it, even if it's not relevant to that section or that platform. So there was a lot of back and forth. Shipping the dinos. So after about 3.5 weeks of packing the show, we prepared to ship the dinos to its first venue. And the fact that we were sending the dinos to a US venue added some layers of complexity, which I won't get into this afternoon because I think we've touched on it on other conversations. But you're welcome to ask us questions. Some general tips that I do have, though, just for shipping dinos or any other large or small exhibitions, is the first is to really devise good truckload plans that maximize the space on the truck, and you can do this with the assistance of your shipper, but also help stage the crates for installation at the next venue in your truckload plan. So what I mean is that the first thing to come off the truck shouldn't be the last thing that you install. And I know that's common sense, but it doesn't always happen like that. And based on what some of the borrowers were saying yesterday, I think this is a really important point. We had about 8 trailer trucks of the exhibition. So we delivered 4 trucks of exhibitry and then 4 trucks of cast and specimens, which were the last thing to go in. And everything in the trucks was actually organized back to those 4 primary colors. So the sections were packed together as much as we could to maximize the space, and also so it was easier for our clients and ourselves. I worked closely with the shipper and the client, or the borrowing venue, to ensure that we had a really clear truck schedule, and we weren't just sending all 8 trailer trucks within 2 days. We really staggered the arrival of the trucks over about a week so that the client had enough time to stage the crates in their Blockbuster hall. And I actually think supervising load out was more important to me than load in, because I find at the end of the show, when your client's done with it, they're just ready to get rid of it and get it out and start preparing for the next venue. And you really want to be there to supervise that your crate lists are accurate, especially if you're clearing customs, but also to ensure that the quality of your show is maintained, and so your next client is getting it in good condition. And also attending load out and the packing stage also lets you do quick repairs in the local city that you're in, so that it's all in good condition for the next client. Do you want to start?
Sure. So the last session, the last couple of sessions, I think today did a really great job talking about what to include in a contract for traveling a major exhibition. So I won't get into it too much, but one thing that I just really wanted to highlight is to be very clear in your contract and with the borrowing institution what the roles and responsibilities of the team that you're sending to oversee the installation, what those are, and what the expectations are as far as the team on the other end, as far as not only the people that are going to be installing your exhibition, the skill sets that are required, but also the equipment that's required. So we went as far as identifying the type of forklift, booms, the type of equipment that are required to set up these massive dinosaurs, as well as the exhibitry. That being said, I mean, we had a very detailed installation manual and a very detailed contract. Don't just assume that they've read it necessarily front to back, or that you're going to have the skill sets that you've asked for. So, you know, we had those roles and responsibilities very clearly identified at both venues, and very different experience installing it at the 2 venues. So, for the first venue was really, you know, I really had to step in and be a little bit more hands-on and provide them a lot more direction. Second venue, they really had the skill sets that were required. I could step back and was there as a resource if they needed any assistance setting up the exhibition. And then I guess the other thing, thinking about working in another country, is to really think about the health and safety requirements that may not be the same as in Canada. So I think this was touched upon really briefly at the last session about working in China, but even working in the States, you do have different occupational health and safety standards. So make sure that when you're working with their teams, that you're not putting any of your team in harm's way. So, you know, example, you know, they could work at heights on ladders that were 18 feet tall. That would never fly in Ontario, that type of thing. So just, you know, protect the safety of your staff working in different environments where they may not be used to working. And over to you.
I think that's it. I think the one last thing I would add is, even though you spend a lot of time developing an installation manual, and I think we we sent ours out to anyone who signed on to this show at least, I think, a year in advance. It didn't mean that they read it. So the first thing that I did when I arrived to pack or install the show was to quiz them on the manual, and I could gauge how much they knew, and most of them didn't even know the coding right away. So it's really important to not assume that they know everything about it, because also the crew sometimes that's hired for the show just join the venue or the client a week before, and they're really just there as labor. So you do have to spend time just giving them some quick training before you even start to install or pack.